View. And now, Penna Dexter.
Thank you very much for joining us, ladies and gentlemen, for Point of View. I am Penna Dexter, and we've got a couple of interesting guests in this first segment of the program. So I will just sort of tease the next hour and then get you back to what we're going to work on here in this first hour of Point of View. We are on in Texas primarily, although we're on some other places. And so I wanted to pull in and do some Texas issues and Texas guests. So we'll be doing that. But later in the program, Tim Winter is going to join me. He has been with us before, and I love having him on because he updates us in his field, which is television, and what's appropriate for children. It changes all the time, and especially in the fall when there are new shows. So Tim Winter from Parents Television Council is going to join me, and we're going to talk about the new fall lineup. We're going to talk about the movie in theaters, The Joker. Should you take your kids there? I mean, it's rated R, so that should say something. But also the idea that there was actually a mass murder in another Batman movie in Colorado. So it's extremely violent content, and parents should not be taking their kids. Tim Winter will tell us why. And Sesame Street, all of the Sesame Street episodes are going to HBO. They're going to be available. And yet it's going to be for a fee. Is that fair? That's another issue that Tim Winter will address. It's sort of an interesting take on it. But in this hour, a little bit later in this hour, Debbie Wuthnow will join me. And she is with, she's executive director of an organization called IVoterGuide. And IVoterGuide does research. I've actually participated in this years ago in evaluating some of the answers to questions for voter guides. And this organization, Heritage Alliance, recruited a few of us to say, okay, here's all the answers that the candidates are giving to the questions for the voter guide that we're going to, several voter guides that we're going to prepare. You as Christian people that are sort of knowledgeable about politics and also Christian values and traditional values, we want you to evaluate this and make your recommendations on candidates. And so that's what I did. It was really fun doing that. It was for some local candidates here in this area, sort of the Northeast Texas area. But anyway, this is a great tool. And IVoterGuide helps people. You know pretty much who you're going to vote for many of the higher level offices, Congress, even state offices. But get down to some of your judicial offices and your local officials, and sometimes people don't pay as much attention. I know I have trouble keeping up with all that. So IVoterGuide is a great tool. And Point of View actually provides lots of voter information. I think we've worked with IVoterGuide and many others, but this particular one I wanted to highlight today. So I'm going to have Debbie with me. And then a little bit later, well, actually, in just a few minutes, Julie McCarty is going to join me, and she's a powerhouse in Tarrant County. She is head of a group called, they've just changed their name, True Texas Project. It was the Northeast Tarrant Tea Party, a very powerful Tea Party group in Texas. So we'll talk all things Tea Party and all things Texas. I do want to mention, because yesterday we talked quite a bit about oral arguments in one of the cases about a funeral home. It's a case where an employee of the funeral home, and I may have misspoken yesterday in saying that this employee, really director of the funeral home, was a female converting to a male, but it's actually the opposite. A male worked there for 6 years and then decided he wanted to dress as and basically transition to female. And the boss there, the owner of the funeral home, didn't think that was appropriate for that position, fired this employee. And that case, the employee sued, has gone all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. They heard oral arguments yesterday, along with two other cases, all going to what is the definition of sex in U.S. law. And the Civil Rights Act, Title VII of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, talks about discrimination on the basis of sex. In these three cases, there's a push, and otherwise. There's been a push to redefine that term sex to mean also sexual orientation and gender identity. Now, the Congress has been asked to do this, and they have never done it. They've declined to do so. And so the courts, if they do the right thing in these cases, will rule that sex still has its original meaning, male and female, biological, because they would be overstepping their bounds in becoming legislators rather than judges. And so that's the correct way for it to go. It's not my opinion. Constitutionally, that is the correct way that it should go. But we will see what the court does. Some of the signs from the oral arguments, I've got a piece in front of me by Elizabeth Slattery talking about what actually the oral arguments did. It was interesting because, here's a couple of the other cases. One is a gay child welfare services coordinator. Another is a gay skydiving instructor. And then there's the Harris Funeral Homes. There's a new rule, actually, that was announced by the High Court. The justices allowed each advocate, each attorney, to make a 2-minute presentation before they jumped in with their questions. And some of the questions were, what the meaning of sex meant in 1964, whether the court should act when Congress could amend the law themselves, and they didn't do that, and what could these cases mean for single-sex bathrooms. This was one of the concerns by the funeral home. Also, what would it mean with sports? We've talked a lot about women's sports and how when males, biological males begin to compete, they ruin it for the women. Ruth Bader Ginsburg had some interesting points that make me think she might go the right way on this. She underscored the definition of sex concern by noting that homosexuality was back in 1964 classified as a mental disorder, and many states actually criminalized sodomy. And her one of the attorneys, the attorney presenting this, called this the days of Mad Men. Remember that series? And said the court has interpreted Title VII to cover other things that weren't within Congress's mind. So he is advocating expanding that definition of sex in the law. When Harris took the lectern, he explained that sex and sexual orientation are independent and distinct characteristics distinct from sex. So we're going to see what the court does on this. It's going to be interesting. Samuel Alito said he made the point and made it clear that Congress has already considered this. There have been various proposals before the U.S. Congress to amend Title VII, and the House passed the Equality Act, which would also do that. We need to be aware of the Equality Act because of this, but the Senate has declined to take that up. And so, really, a lot of attorneys in these cases address that Congress is better suited to weigh the competing interests at stake, not the justices. So we will see what kind of rulings we get in these cases. It always takes weeks and months, probably near the end of the term, since this is a hot button issue. But ladies and gentlemen, it's one to watch, and look for articles and really descriptions of the courtroom scene. And when Kelly Shackelford gets back in here, I'm sure he was there, and he will be able to tell us what he thinks and where he thinks, especially in the Harris Funeral Homes case. It's an ADF, Alliance Defending Freedom case, one that really affects religious freedom and conscience. Well, next up, we will talk about Tarrant County Tea Party issues with Julie McCarty. We will be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Planned Parenthood has been facing some political setbacks in Congress and some state legislatures, but Planned Parenthood seems to be making some advances in the culture arena. One example of that is the impact the organization is having in Hollywood. The director of arts and entertainment engagement at Planned Parenthood was bragging the other day about her growing influence in Hollywood. She confirmed that the organization advised on more than 150 productions since 2014. This has been a concerted effort to influence the abortion dialogue and thus shape people's perspectives. The director explained that originally she would be watching TV and going to movies in order to figure out who might be open to including storylines. Now she has repeat clients and even has people calling her. One article asked whether culture can change politics. That is hardly a difficult question. I've often said that politics is downstream from culture. Change culture and cultural perceptions, and you will eventually change political perspectives. I was completely unaware of the pervasive influence of Planned Parenthood in Hollywood. I was aware of the pro-abortion message in the film Cider House Rules that was based on the novel by John Irwin. The coming-of-age story challenges the moral perspective of the character played by Tobey Maguire because of the doctor played by Michael Caine. The rules in the cider house are posted in the dorm of the workers, but they eventually decide to write their own rules, thus reinforcing the theme of moral relativism. Although that was a blatant abortion message, apparently Planned Parenthood has been working behind the scenes to make sure a latent pro-abortion message appears in films rather than a pro-life message. That is why we always need discernment whenever we watch a film. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. I'm Penna Dexter. Of our next guest, the New York Times just this August said one of the most active groups in Texas, and the Texas Tribune said in August 2019, responsible for recruiting and electing a faction of the most conservative politicians in the state, one of the state's most influential groups. This is, I'm sorry, not the Texas Tribune, but the San Antonio Express News. And my guest is Julie McCarty. She is the, I think it's president of the Tarrant. Actually, it's called Texas Truth Project. True Texas Project. And this is a new name, and that's why I'm getting it wrong, because it's recently changed from the Northeast Tarrant Tea Party. Julie, thank you for joining me.
I'm excited to be here. I knew you would get that right eventually. True Texas Project.
I like it. And, you know, I think what this speaks to is the fact that the Tea Party movement has become sort of enmeshed into conservative politics nationally and also in all the states. So it makes sense not to use the term anymore because it's become mainstream in our conservative minds, at least.
Yes, I think there was a lot of negativism that the media successfully attached to the Tea Party name. And so it was important to us to drop that and let people know, yeah, we're still here and we're still active. We have a broader focus and we're not the boogeyman.
Well, right. And, you know, even under that name that seems to have such negative connotations, you in the Northeast Tarrant Tea Party accomplished so much. I mean, it's really fun to see, and you are recognized as one of the most successful and active groups. Really, with bringing you replaced all state house representatives in your area with Tea Party conservatives. That's quite an accomplishment.
We did. Yeah, right from the get-go, we did that, and that's what put us on the map. It was huge.
Yeah, there was really a move. But okay, so the thing that I'm concerned about in Texas is, yes, we are known to be a conservative red state, but a lot of people are concerned that we are becoming purple. Are you?
Absolutely. We're watching the big three. So that would be, our governor, our lieutenant governor, and our Speaker of the House. We're watching them run around the state just bragging about how fantastic they did this last session. And it was completely a purple session. The conservatives got nothing that we were after. And it's an embarrassment. It really is an embarrassment because Texas is supposed to lead the way, and we're not. And I think other states look to us, and they're hanging all their hope on us. And what's going on over here is scary.
What is your organization doing about it? I mean, you're talking about the True Texas Project. We need a True Texas Project because Texans cannot get complacent.
Absolutely. So, we're continuing to do a lot of what we've already done because it is successful, and that's educate people. The more you can educate people on what's going on and how to get involved, the more they're actually going to take ownership of it and do something. But we're having to kind of change that focus in that, we used to be, we were very successful in getting people elected, and we're so excited about, we would raise a bunch of money and have these candidates, and they'd get to Austin, and one by one, they turn their backs on you, and it's defeating and discouraging. And then, you're deflated. You don't want to keep working. So we have to switch that focus from people to policy. So now we're very much looking at partnerships and building our army just as strong and as big as it can be so that we can lobby on policy. And whether your state representative is a friend or a foe, it doesn't matter. We have an army behind us that is going to apply pressure and influence to get legislation passed that we need.
All right. First of all, I want to ask you top issues. But first of all, if people want to get involved with you, we do have a link to your website at pointofview.net. But what are ways that they can become involved with you? And it's, some people have a small amount of time, others have a lot.
No matter who you are, we will put you to work. So however much time you have, we have a citizen advocate program. So anytime we have something that needs to get done, we will, if you're on our citizen advocacy list, we will contact you and say, you can make this phone call, you can send this email or write this letter, or you can go to Austin with us. You can just go to Austin and show up as a warm body, or you can testify. You can visit different offices that people will assign you to, but do something.
Yeah, do something. What are you working on right now? Because we're in between. We've just finished a session in May. And as you said, there were some disappointing areas, to say the least. And we don't want to be on that track again. So what are you working on?
Mm-hmm. Well, it never ends. So when it's in session, we're working on things to lobby about. And when it's out of session, it's elections. So, we're you're right. We're in that limbo right now where we're having to focus on both. Obviously, we're still hoping for a special session, and maybe that'll happen after the primary election. But there's some key issues that need to be addressed before the election in November, like to protect voter fraud, that kind of thing. We definitely have our eyes on the red flag laws and all the Second Amendment issues. There's hearings this week on redistricting and just preparing for that and getting our legislators on board with all the different facets of that, because how they always end up in the courts and such, and we want to avoid that. So, there's always issues for us to be focused on.
So how do you keep people updated? So people that are hooked up with you, how do you update them? How often do you update them? And how do you, you say that, you can either write a letter or you can go to Austin or probably somewhere in between. So how do you activate people?
Obviously you get the most plugged in by attending our meetings. So we meet once a month in North Richland Hills, and the more you meet people, the more comfortable you feel being involved with them, right? So that's always the first step. But we send out emails when we have volunteer needs to do all that advocacy stuff I was talking about before. That's a specific email list. So you would just contact us and say, hey, I want to be involved in that. And, we'll train you. We'll train you to do whatever you want to do, whatever interests you. That's what we're here for, is to educate, train, get you going.
I love this. I have to tell you, getting involved in these issues, first of all, elections and issues, yes, they're separate things, but they're also together because candidates run on the issues. And the way to get voters excited is because there's an urgent matter that needs to be taken care of. And so it's really fun. Going to meetings is sometimes a lost art today because we have the internet, but going and actually being with people who think like you, who want to work on these things together, is such an enriching experience. So I recommend that folks find out about, especially you're living in Tarrant County. It's mostly Northeast Tarrant County that you draw on.
Right, because that's where we started, was Northeast Tarrant Tea Party. But our influence, obviously, we've got people coming in from Dallas and Plano, Frisco, Arlington, all over.
Okay.
So, Yeah.
Since you're so
But
dynamic,
Tarrant
people are
is
driving
key. Yeah.
to be with you.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope they think that.
Well, I do. I encourage. I mean, this has been probably one of the most fulfilling, fun times in politics in my life was being involved in a Republican club and being involved in elections. And we always learned about the issues whenever we had meetings. Is that what you do?
Absolutely. And I think you're so right when you say that. I mean, it's about building community. It's like, you go to church because you want to be with like-minded people and be built up and learn things. That's how I feel about these political clubs. It's people that think like you that can, iron sharpens iron, and you share facts and you share ideas and you get encouraged, because so much of it is bad news. Well, let's encourage each other that you're not alone. And that's really how the Tea Party started. We all wanted to know we're not alone in our frustration with the government.
And I would say that, you can accomplish so much more as a group than you can as an individual. And it's just, there's so many different personality types. Don't you agree that probably as a leader, you're having to kind of match people up with the task or match people with one another?
We do our best, but like I said, we are definitely building that army. So no matter who you are, what your interest level is, we'll use you. Like we've got new initiatives now to partner with college students and help them get plugged in. And I mean, any age, we'll take you. Any amount of time you have, we'll take you.
What is your website? We have it clicked. We have it to click through at Point of View, but just give out the website this one time so we can make sure that folks that are out there listening get that.
It's truetexasproject.com. Everything's all spelled out, truetexasproject.com.
Okay, well, it's a wonderful name. Listen, thank you so much for joining me, Julie. I hope you'll be on call sometimes when we've got issues. In fact, I hope you'll contact us when we've got issues, because we've got this hour where we're primarily right now on in Texas. So we would love to hear about things you're concerned about.
That would be wonderful. We'd love to do that.
All right, Julie, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
That's Julie McCarty, and she has been a leader for a while, very successful. She's with the True Texas Project. You can find out more by going to pointofview.net and clicking through. We're going to stay on this topic of politics, Texas politics, but just politics and voting in general, because Debbie Wuthnow from IVoterGuide will join me next.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View radio talk show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @PointOfViewRTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @PointOfViewRTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Penna Dexter.
Thank you very much for joining me for this segment of Point of View. And, you know, we are always encouraging people to vote and to turn out to vote and all of that. And that's great. But we don't really, I mean, I hate to say it this way, but we don't really want people to vote unless they're informed voters. And we like them to have the right values when they vote so that the candidates that will be the best for America and for the state will be elected. And that is, in a sense, I don't want to define their mission statement, but that's what I see my next guest's organization as accomplishing. Her name is Debbie Wuthnow, and she is executive director of IVoterGuide. IVoterGuide is such a great tool, and it's really, they provide fact-based voter guides in several states, including Texas. And it's just such a great organization because they dig deep and find out what the candidates believe about various issues that matter to Christian conservatives. Debbie, well, first of all, I saw Debbie this weekend at a conference, and so it got back on my radar screen that we needed to talk here on the air. So, Debbie, thank you for joining me.
Oh, thank you, Penna, for having me.
Well, it's good to have you. I mean, were you sitting next to me when Mike Pence came?
I think I may well have been.
He may
yes,
have been.
I was.
Anyway, that was fun. I told everybody about it the other day. It was fun to hear him. But Debbie, this is an organization that's a project of Heritage Alliance. A lot of listeners may know of that organization. But IVoterGuide is a project of that group, a very successful one. And it really equips Christians, and that's what we need. We need to be equipped to make a difference because it's really a stewardship and a mandate. But you've been there several years, but in 2016, you were named executive director and you rebranded. And your website, I have to say, is beautiful. Just tell us about what's available there.
Well, we just launched a new website just a couple of months ago, and we seek to be a one-stop shop for voting resources. And if you look at our homepage at iVoterGuide.com, we make it clear really up front what our mission is. It says we're grounded in God, but we're rooted in research. So we research candidates trying to equip faith-based voters to identify those candidates who share their values and will fight to preserve their values or their freedoms to share their faith. So our philosophy is really it's more important to look at what a candidate has done and less at what they say they're going to do, because a lot of times they say one thing and they get elected and they turn around and do something differently. So we really do that. We dig for research on, what have they done? So we're looking at their vote ratings of if they're elected to office, how have they voted? We look for who have they given money to? Who have they received money from? Because that tells a lot about what's important to them. We aggregate about endorsements from about 1,000 different organizations. And, of course, we give each candidate a chance to answer our issue survey, which covers, a broad spectrum of issues. It starts with social issues, which as Christians are the most important to us, but also fiscal issues, and we even ask them spiritual questions. So, just trying to provide as much data on each candidate. And then what's really unique about iVoterGuide is that then we have vetted volunteers that share our conservative values, that look at all of the data we've gathered, do independent research, if they, have worked as grassroots lobbyists or, have knowledge of those legislators. And then we assign a rating to each candidate, basically looking at what is their political philosophy. And it ranges from very liberal to very conservative. For the average voter, that really gives them a side-by-side comparison of, which candidate is more conservative. But we do have all the research there to back that up. And we provide it nationwide. I mean, we're not just in Texas. We began in Texas, so that is our home, and we began in Dallas. But in 2012, we went across the nation, and we have been researching the federal candidates nationwide in 2016 and 2018. And then there are a number of states where we go beyond the federal races, Texas being one of them, and evaluate all the statewide candidates. So, who has a lot of people have information about president and Senate candidates, but who has good information about ag commissioner or railroad commissioner or
Right.
state Supreme Court or state Senate and state House? So that's really, I think, the niche that we help to fill, or the itch that we scratch. You know, we've had some research that 75% of voters stated that a nonpartisan voter guide was the number one factor in helping them make a decision. And the further down the ballot the candidate was, the more likely they were to use a voter guide. So the value of IVoterGuide is that we do go not just across the nation, but down the ballot in 20 key states in this coming election.
You know, I think listeners to Point of View are probably in this position where when election time comes around, your neighbors and friends that, you see, but you're not really working with politically, will call you up or send you an email and ask you, who do I vote for? I mean, they pretty much, as you said, they know who they're going to vote for U.S. Senate or for president, but they don't know who to vote for their state legislator. And, it's arguable that person would affect their lives more than the president would. So it's very important.
Well, and how can somebody can call you that lives in Florida and says, help me know who to vote for. And how, Penn, are you going to know,
right.
Information about those candidates across the nation? So that really is our mission.
Yeah, so it's so useful and valuable. And I will say it's IVoterGuide.com. You can also go to pointofview.net and click through. But it's pretty easy to remember at election time. I think you've picked a great name, Debbie, just to help people to keep that in mind every time an election comes around.
Well, thank you. And if you think about it, it's iVoterGuide because it's an internet voter guide, but it's also individualized so that when you go to the website, the IVoterGuide.com, you can enter your zip code or your voting address, and the only races you'll see are the ones that are on your personal ballot, which
really?
I think makes it so it's you don't have to know that I'm Congressional District 10 and State Senate District 23 and State House 142. It's personalized to your zip code and your voting address, so really easy to use, wonderfully easy to share with your family and friends across the nation because it works in all the nation. We've even got, resources in each state of when are upcoming elections happening, when do you register to vote. You can even sign up for reminders, and we'll send you an email reminder when the voter guide's released and it's time to vote in your state.
Well, you've covered all of your bases, I think. Debbie, I want to switch gears a little bit because organizations like yours, they are, nonprofit, exist to, you've got to have supporters and people that are behind you and with you, and you've certainly developed that. And I know that you're holding an event next week. And so I wanted to give you an opportunity to tell folks, especially in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, about that.
Well, thank you, Penna. So it's the research that we do it at a very reasonable cost. Most of our researchers are called patriots who work for us at a very reasonable rate from their home. And so we've set a fundraising goal to cover this research through the 2020 elections. We'll be evaluating 8,000 candidates. So this event that we're holding is going to be Friday, October the 18th. It's in the Dallas area. There is information on at iVoterGuide.com. You can purchase tickets. You can sponsor. You can just send a donation. But what we do is we call it the Walk the Talk Award. And as a Christian, you know that walking the talk means saying what you do and doing what you said you're going to do. So we honor legislators who have not only campaigned as conservatives, but gone on to legislate as them. And we present them the Walk the Talk Award. And this year, on Friday at lunch, we will be honoring Senator Ted Cruz, and then Texas Senators Pat Fallon, Brandon Creighton, Bob Hall, and Angela Paxton.
Well, that'll be fun. So they'll all be there.
They will all be there receiving their award. If you're interested in sponsoring and getting some one-on-one time, we have a VIP event beforehand. So they'll all be there. You can sit and hear from them, but they're there for us to encourage them. And supporters can come and help us to raise funds to continue to do what we do in the next election cycle.
So this event is a lunch event?
It is a lunch, yeah. It was originally a dinner the 17th, but President Trump planned a rally at the same time and asked Senator Cruz to speak at his rally. So we're accommodating his schedule and kind of shuffling, but still, we're still wanting to encourage them and still needing to raise the funds.
Yes, well, I think I'm encouraging people so they can find out about it if they didn't have time to write down what you just said by going to iVoterGuide.com, right?
there's a carousel at the top. Click on the event, or in the ACT menu at the top, it'll say, learn about the event. It's all there.
Well, it sounds like a lot of fun, Debbie, and I appreciate your sharing all of this with us today. And really, we appreciate what you are doing there at IVoterGuide.com. Perhaps we can sort of continue to talk a few times as the elections approach.
Well, definitely. And in fact, I would point out, there's elections in just a few weeks in Virginia. That is key, and iVoterGuide is available in Virginia. So if you have friends or neighbors in Virginia, tell them about this resource. We even have materials that you can use there to block walk or to pass out at church to tell your friends and your neighbors about iVoterGuide as a resource. So the voter guides are available right now in Virginia, Kentucky, Louisiana, and Mississippi for their November elections.
Fantastic. Debbie Wuthnow, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Penna.
And we'll be right back after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. We've got a full show today. I'm excited about the guests that are coming up. Next up, after our next break, we'll unpack a little bit of news, but then we will talk with Tim Winter from Parents Television Council, and really about television, what's available in the fall, what's good, what's bad. What about this movie, The Joker? Parents Television Council says you shouldn't take your kids. We will talk about that later in the program. But since we've been on the topic of politics, and, I have been hosting this week as Kirby's away, and I haven't talked I barely mentioned impeachment. And that's by design because everybody else is talking about it everywhere. So I thought I maybe just let them do it. But there are a couple of pieces of information we ought to have as we think about this. And one of them is the question of whether an impeachment inquiry requires a full vote of the House. Always when there has been impeaching of someone, it has. When Nixon was impeached, for instance, the House voted to do so, I believe. He pulled out before he was actually impeached. But it's always been sort of a given that there's a vote in the House. This time, though, Nancy Pelosi claims that you don't need a vote. And she's correct. This is coming from Hans Van Spakovsky of Heritage Foundation. He's an attorney and he's an expert on elections. He says that the Constitution doesn't explicitly require this vote. The House has the sole power of impeachment, but really the gravity of the situation requires that the House vote. I mean, Pelosi went ahead and she directed 6 different committees to investigate the president. And this is actually much more partisan than most of the steps that have been taken in the past. But she really says that there's no House precedent and that the whole House vote is necessary is simply false. But this is it has so much importance, so much salience to the nation and what's coming up that the House should vote on this. Now, whether they would actually impeach the president, if the House has enough votes to do that, they could. They might do it. She's not giving them the opportunity. It's an extraordinary action, says Hans Van Spakovsky, especially in a system of government that's based on people electing their own leaders. And certainly impeachment alone cannot remove the president, as we've said over and over. The Senate will have to vote on that. It actually requires 2/3 of the Senate to convict, and that would be 67 senators. That is just not going to happen in the current Senate. Neither of the presidents who were impeached, Andrew Johnson in 1868 and Bill Clinton in 1999. Nixon, I just have to clarify, was not actually impeached. It was passed out of the Judiciary Committee, but he resigned. Neither of them were convicted. Neither Andrew Johnson in 1868 nor Bill Clinton in 1999 were convicted. So they stayed in office. And as a matter of fact, Bill Clinton then went on to win another term. So, this could happen this could actually come back to bite the Democrats, especially the way they're handling it. In an October 3rd letter, McCarthy asked for a vote. Kevin McCarthy of the full House. He's the leader of the House, House of Representatives, under Speaker Pelosi. He's the minority leader. He reminded Pelosi, though, that the Judiciary Committee report on the Clinton impeachment investigation said, because impeachment is dedicated solely to the House of Representatives by the Constitution, the full House should be involved in critical decision-making regarding various stages of impeachment. She's not doing that. In the Clinton case, there was an investigation to determine whether sufficient grounds exist for impeachment. And again, the body with the sole power of impeachment is the Congress. So McCarthy contends that body should vote, and he's pushing for that. Moreover, although I don't know, do we really want the House to vote on this? I mean, in a sense, if Pelosi just pushes this forward without the House voting on it, I think it just makes it less and less legitimate and perhaps provides less of a threat to the president. I think one way or the other, it seems like President Trump is going about this not very worried about it, and sometimes just with this attitude of bring it on. That may just be his persona and the face that he's showing to the public. But in a sense, I feel that he and many in the administration are thinking that impeachment could actually help in the election. One of the questions that Kevin McCarthy was asking was, will the ranking minority member of the investigating committees, because she's got 6 committees looking into Trump, will that person, it would be the Republican leader on each committee, have the authority to issue subpoenas and question witnesses, or will the majority just do all of this and ignore the minority? Will the president's lawyers be able to attend all the hearings and depositions, to present evidence, to object to the admittance of evidence, to cross-examine witnesses, or to recommend witnesses to be interviewed? Kevin McCarthy, again, the minority leader in the House, says if Pelosi says no to these questions, she will actually be denying the president the bare minimum rights granted to his predecessors. And you just kind of wonder, there hasn't been this formal impeachment. And so does she feel, and do the Democrats feel, that they are exempted from having to obey these normal procedures because of the loosey-goosey way they've declared impeachment or inquired into impeachment? And now you hear about Trump really refusing to cooperate. And in one, he's getting a lot of slings and arrows for that from his opponents, but they haven't even bothered to vote on it. So since they're not voting, and for other reasons, this president is saying, well, I'm not going to go the extra mile to provide what you are asking for. Hans, back to Hans von Spakovsky, he says the interest of the integrity of government and the legitimacy of government is served by the entire House considering and authorizing an impeachment inquiry. But we're sort of going off the rails here. He says we need a transparent investigation. We need authority for both the majority and minority committee members to investigate, to subpoena, and to call witnesses. America's founders, he says, did not put impeachment into the Constitution as a partisan tool. And, in other impeachments, both parties have been involved in the impeachments. I don't think there's going to be a Republican voting to impeach this president out of the House of Representatives. I think that's why Pelosi doesn't want to allow that vote. How this process is conducted today, says Hans, will reveal who in the House of Representatives agrees with them. And then the Daily Signal also published a piece by Andy Biggs. I should have posted this today, but it's at the Daily Signal, and it's by Andy Biggs. He's the head of the House Freedom Caucus. And, he's basically saying that this impeachment push against President Trump is unfair because they keep changing the rules by which they're going after the president. And so he's asking every fair American to consider what the Democrats, led by House Intelligence Chairman Adam Schiff and Judiciary Chairman Jerry Nadler and Speaker Pelosi, are doing to President Trump. And, of course, and he goes back and talks about really how the impeachment started the day after the 2016 election, as we know. Talking about the crazy obstruction of justice allegation that was investigated along with quote-unquote collusion for 2.5 years. So here we are, and just wanted to remind you how crazy this process is, and yet it's serious, and we need to be in prayer for this president. Well, next up, we will start to talk about entertainment and Hollywood. Stay with us.
When you give to Point of View, does it make a difference? Jeremy Dies would tell you that it does. He grew up listening to Point of View in the back seat of his mom's car, and it helped to shape his thinking.
I had parents that were able to sit across from me at the dinner table after we listened to Marlon Maddox and Kirby Anderson years ago and think through what the scriptures say about these issues of current significance in our lives. That's only possible because Point of View has come along and ministered into my life and made me who I am today. And here I am today defending religious liberty, partly because Marlon Maddox and Penna Dexter and Kirby Anderson were the ones that were pushing me towards all that. They taught me how to think through these issues. They didn't tell me what to think. They taught me how to think.
Each gift you give will change lives. Not every Point of View listener will become a Jeremy, but if they listen for very long, they will be changed. And that will change how they impact and affect the lives of the people around them. So make that decision to change a life today. Join the Truth Team and boldly stand for truth in a world of lies, distortion, and information manipulation. Go to pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151.
Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Penna Dexter.
Thank you very much for joining us, ladies and gentlemen, for Point of View. As you know, President Trump has pleased Christians and conservatives by being an advocate for religious freedom, religious liberty. And on the international front, he appointed Sam Brownback as ambassador at large for international religious freedom. And on that commission, which exists to protect religious liberty around the world, he has appointed some of our favorites in the conservative movement, like Tony Perkins from Family Research Council and Gary Bauer, who appears on this program often. He also appointed someone who I know and believe is very talented person on many fronts. Her name is Nadine Maenza, and she's my guest today. And the news item that really is going to animate our conversation today is going to be that the president has announced that he will pull some troops from Syria. Turkey may go in to the areas on its border, and what repercussions does that have for the humanitarian situation that exists there? We'll talk with Nadine about that. But Nadine, thank you for joining me.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be on today.
I want to mention that besides being on the President's Commission for Religious Freedom, the Commission for International Religious Freedom, she was appointed back in May. Nadine is also a speaker, writer. She's a policy expert, and she is the founding executive director of Patriot Voices, which is an organization that Rick Santorum was involved in founding.
Right.
And
he's our chairman. Yep.
Yeah, he's the chairman, and so they've worked together for many years. And she's just very concerned about the persecuted communities of various faiths from some of the most oppressive countries. And so there's so much we can talk about. And we were going to do a half-hour interview. We're now doing the full hour, but, probably need more. But the reason I wanted to have you on, first of all, Nadine, is because I saw this piece, and it was kind of in conjunction with the UN meeting on religious liberty, but it talked about the persecution of Christians around the world and how bad it is and widespread it is, and that 80% of those suffering persecution are Christians. So that was a big statistic for everybody to absorb.
It's really shocking how all over the world persecution of really all faiths have increased. So, the Pew Foundation, which is, a secular organization that does research on a lot of things, very credited by all sorts of groups, they recently did a report, and they did a 10-year report, and they showed high levels of persecution in 40% of the countries. And in terms of persecution, they found Christians to be the most persecuted in 143 countries in 2000, where 10 years before it was 107. So Muslims were right below at 140 countries compared to 96. And then, of course, even Jews, 87 countries versus 51 10 years earlier. So what we're seeing is just this oppression around the world, governments to control people of faith.
So, there comes a question, how much can we Christians in America do about this, or what should we feel responsible for? And that's why I looked at this piece, this statement by Ambassador Brownback, who heads up the International Religious Freedom Commission, because he said there's a big guilt complex in a lot of the West, and we shouldn't be standing up for Christians. That somehow Christian. Yeah, go ahead, because,
really
I think people sometimes do feel guilty because, we're standing up for our religious liberty here in the U.S., and we do this all the time on this show. But, what is happening here, it's not the same as what's happening around the world. And so, but we shouldn't feel guilty for standing up for it on all fronts, should we?
Not at all. I mean, I think we need, and the Bible, tells us to advocate for those in chains as if we were in chains with them. So I think that there is certainly a mandate from the Bible for us to be intervening for people who are in chains, that are being persecuted. And I also want to mention that, Ambassador Brownback is one of the best voices out there on persecution of the Muslims, the Uyghur Muslims in China, and the Rohingya Muslims in Myanmar. So he has been an advocate for all faiths, in saying that we don't have to apologize for also advocating for Christians. And his statements really came from a report that's so fascinating that came out from in the United Kingdom. Actually, the last foreign secretary had commissioned a very in-depth report and asked the Bishop Peturo to do it. And then they just came out with that this summer, the final report. And his report, what they found in the United Kingdom is that their foreign office does a lot about religious freedom of religion or belief, as most people call it, like internationally. And they've been a leader on a lot of things. But what they found is they weren't supporting Christians. They were supporting every other faith because they were almost embarrassed to support Christians. And that's kind of where that all came from. We in the United States our State Department is frankly always been really good about supporting persecuted Christians. In fact, some people have accused them of doing too much in the Christian side. The UK had been not doing any really on the Christian side, but it did really bring a point that we don't need to apologize for advocating for people of our own faith. And I'll be honest, the best advocates for the Baha'is are Baha'is. The best advocate for Rohingyas are Rohingyas. So, when we find people in Washington that come to us at the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom and bring us information about a community that's being persecuted, oftentimes it's their own, and they don't apologize. They don't come in and say, I'm so sorry to apologize. And so as Christians, we really shouldn't either. We should be able to come in and say we're really concerned about Christians in Iran, which we should be, because Iran is really horrible with Christians and other religions as well. And I also want to make the point that, it's okay for Christians, too, to advocate for other faiths. In fact, we should, because it helps Christians. First of all, it's the right thing to do, number one, but it also helps Christians. For instance, in Iraq, the perfect example. The last thing you want to do is target Christians to the point where people only see us advocating for them, because it makes them look like they're West, right? They're Western, when actually they're the original Christians, So we're the ones copying them in some respects. So, but it still makes them look, quote, American. And also it's really good to advocate for Yazidis and the other religious minorities there, because we want, first of all, they all need help. And we want them to all bind together and work as a group and protect each other. And that's important for minority populations in different countries. We often see that in Iran. We see the Baha'is helping the Christians. We've always historically seen Christians and Yazidis helping each other through the centuries in places like Turkey and Iraq and other places. So, we do find that when they're the minority in a country, to be able to have a wonderful relationship with other religious communities helps them to be able to survive. So we really do encourage all faiths, that we advocate for, but obviously not apologizing for advocating for our own faith.
After the break, we are going to talk about Nadine's visit to Iraq, recent, and the time she spent there. And, as she mentioned, ladies and gentlemen, certainly Iraq was, just a cradle of Christianity in a sense. And
yes.
There's just been a fleeing from Iraq because of just many reasons. And the U.S. has been blamed to be partially responsible. So I want to ask her about the situation there now. Is she encouraged? Is she discouraged? And, how should people be praying for that area of the world? And then later in our interview, we're going to, jump on the Syria issue. I know a lot of people are very concerned right now about it. And so we want to get some of the on-the-ground information and what Nadine thinks should be done going forward. We'll do all of that right after this. Stay tuned for more of Point of View.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Planned Parenthood has been facing some political setbacks in Congress and some state legislatures, but Planned Parenthood seems to be making some advances in the culture arena. One example of that is the impact the organization is having in Hollywood. The director of arts and entertainment engagement at Planned Parenthood was bragging the other day about her growing influence in Hollywood. She confirmed that the organization advised on more than 150 productions since 2014. This has been a concerted effort to influence the abortion dialogue and thus shape people's perspectives. The director explained that originally she would be watching TV and going to movies in order to figure out who might be open to including storylines. Now she has repeat clients and even has people calling her. One article asked whether culture can change politics. That is hardly a difficult question. I've often said that politics is downstream from culture. Change culture and cultural perceptions, and you will eventually change political perspectives. I was completely unaware of the pervasive influence of Planned Parenthood in Hollywood. I was aware of the pro-abortion message in the film Cider House Rules that was based on the novel by John Irwin. The coming-of-age story challenges the moral perspective of the character played by Tobey Maguire because of the doctor played by Michael Caine. The rules in the cider house are posted in the dorm of the workers, but they eventually decide to write their own rules, thus reinforcing the theme of moral relativism. Although that was a blatant abortion message, apparently Planned Parenthood has been working behind the scenes to make sure a latent pro-abortion message appears in films rather than a pro-life message. That is why we always need discernment whenever we watch a film. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. I am Penna Dexter. My guest is Nadine Maenza, and she is on President Trump's Commission for Religious Freedom. And she gets to travel around the world and be part of our sort of ambassadorship under Sam Brownback, who heads that up. And Nadine, you mentioned to me that you'd been to Iraq recently, and of course, it's very sad to see the Christians that fled, and part of it has had to do with U.S. policy. So tell us where things stand now.
Right. So I was there in August, and end of July and beginning of August, and I was actually there to speak at a commemoration of the 5-year anniversary of the Yazidi genocide, which a lot of your viewers remember hearing about Nadia Murad and how they went into Sinjar and literally decimated the Yazidi community, killing the men and taking the women. And so we were there able to do that, and we were able to meet with a lot of people on the ground that are doing important work there. And so that it's a mixed bag in Iraq. So we and obviously we've been seeing in the last few days, last week, protests there. So, first of all, the USAID has just been remarkable. As you know, the vice president has been very involved in bringing resources to the community to help these religious minorities. And they like to be called components in Iraq. They don't like the term minority components because they're a component of, they've been around longer, if you think about it, the Christian community, than a lot of the other communities. So minority sounds like they don't belong, so they really like their components, but obviously our viewers probably more familiar with minority. But they've done an amazing job to try to rebuild communities in infrastructure and brought together the most impressive group of organizations, and we just had a hearing. The U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom just had a hearing this last month, where we brought together some of those people to kind of give us more input on how everything was coming together. We had Heartland Institute that does a lot of the legal work, helping people, like, for instance, what do you do when you leave and someone moves into your house? When you come back, right? So there's these groups that are helping people with the legal side, how to come back, and but what we have found consistently, and we saw this in our hearing with all the speakers we had from USAID, we had Samaritan's Purse, we had Free Yazidi Foundation, a Syrian Policy Institute, people that are on the ground or that are doing work on the ground, and at the end of the day, it kind of came back that really the security situation there is such that it makes it still difficult for people to come back. There are some communities where 30 to 50% have returned, Karakash, for instance, Bartella, but then 2% of Christians have returned to the Telfik district and only 10% in Sinjar. So you think how long it's been, and yet only 10% can come back. So you have a situation where the Kurdistan regional government is claiming kind of control, the Peshmerga of part of it, then you have the Iraqi security forces and part of it. But really the big player that's the problem here are the militias. And it's hard for us to understand because we think of militias as being independent, just like random people gather together and arm themselves. But the militias were an important component when we were fighting ISIS. So the United States government trained them, armed them, and many of them most of them probably had allegiances to Iran. But they were fighting ISIS, and if you remember, we needed everyone to fight ISIS.
And
so
what are their allegiances now?
Iran. So what you have, but they're paid by the government of Iraq. So they're militias, but they're not independent like we think of them. They actually are an arm of the security forces of the government, but they're independent in the sense they don't necessarily follow rules, they don't follow orders, yet they're still paid by the government, and they are unfortunately very scary to the Christians. They do harass them in some areas. Christians are afraid to come back because of them, and so it is a really precarious situation still in Iraq because of these militias. Even though there's some wonderful work happening, there's still some things that are going on. But the Iraqi government, when we were there, had called in an order saying all the militias had to come under the government, had to come under the security forces. And so we were encouraged by that, but in much of the country that happened. But of course, the part we're talking about, the Nineveh Plains, that area they did not come under. They did not obey. And it didn't seem like there was a consequence. In fact, one of the militias, I believe it was either the 50th or the 30th, they're both notorious for violations against religious minorities, actually put on Facebook that they had talked to the government. The government said they don't have to come under their governance. And then they showed up with tanks, with 3 tanks, pictures of tanks and people. And so I was told by people on the ground that between 30 and 50 families fled when they saw that. Now, we think the tanks were from Iran, but just the idea that they were able to show up with them, that they have that much power. They can literally bring a tank over the Iranian border into Iraq to the Nineveh Plains, and no one stops them. So there really is a precarious situation. We need to keep praying for the Christians. A lot of them are up in the Kurdistan area living in refugee camps, but that is not a long-term situation, as you can probably imagine, for any family.
So what if someone does get back into their home, and are many of them coming back getting jobs? Is there, right. I understand that more infrastructure is being built, so there must be some jobs and things that are being created too.
There are, with the construction projects, there are some jobs in security, and there are some civil service jobs. So those seem to be where people are going. Mosul's we're not seeing a lot of people come back because of this militia situation. Some areas have it worse than others. The ones that aren't, it's tough. We have more people coming. I was able to, after I was in Iraq, go to Jordan and meet with some refugees that were there. And
is that where most of the refugees are?
No, most of them probably in the Kurdistan area up in the northern part of Iraq. But there are quite a few refugees in Jordan, both Muslim refugees as well as Christians. And in the Christians I met, the way it works in a country like Jordan is, they have their own economic issues and jobs and things like that. So they don't allow refugees to go to school or work. So if you want to send your children to school, you have to pay for like a private Christian school or usually Catholic school, and it's very expensive. So I met several families from Mosul, and the stories I heard, I was told were just consistent with all the stories. For instance, I met a family where the mother was a hairdresser in Mosul, the father was a school teacher. She was targeted by ISIS because she basically did Christian women's hair and was a beautician, and they thought that was, obviously a sin. And so she was actually stabbed in the marketplace, almost died. They saved her life, but then they gassed her home, and her oldest daughter, who had just had a baby and married, was in the shower, and because she was in this enclosed space, she died. So they fled to northern the Kurdistan area, northern Iraq, with a lot of other Mosul residents. And then they were put in a metal shipping container. They turned them into homes for the refugees. But the heat in those got to be over 120 degrees. Imagine that. And they had two of their youngest children developed a nerve disease from the heat, where they started losing their eyesight. So they had to go. So they fled to Jordan because they had nowhere else to go. And in Jordan, of course, they're refugees, but they don't get any money from the UN or anyone else that's being a refugee. So they literally have depended on NGOs to feed them and take care of them. And because they could work, but they're not allowed to work. And so they've raised money to send their kids to school, and it's very disheartening for them to see, how hard this is for their family. So they decided to go back to Mosul because they felt like they didn't have any choices. They went to go visit their home that had been damaged to see what could be done to fix it so they could live there again. And they got a phone call on their cell phone saying, if you come back, more of your family will die. We've seen a lot of this where a lot of the ISIS members, or even community members that aligned with ISIS, have continued to harass people when they come back in. And so they ended up going back to Jordan. Now they're there. They've been turned down for resettlement by 7 different times by different countries. They've not been able to be resettled. For me, it was hard to leave them.
Yeah.
Because they were a wonderful family. And I know if they were in America, they'd be working, and the sad thing for me was when I was flying back from Jordan, I was sitting next to a Jordanian family, a 2-year-old boy, a mother with a newborn, a couple other kids, really adorable family, very good on a flight that seemed scary at first. And, and they told me they were immigrating to the United States. And I was sad knowing, I was happy for them, and obviously they're welcome, but to think that we wanted them, but we weren't willing to take the Iraqi family, but those are the stories. So when people say, oh, they should stay nearby, well, what does that mean? Like, where is nearby when you're in Iraq? And if you're nearby, is it in a place like where they're just living off the goodness of others? And, so please pray for these vulnerable people, that the Lord will open doors. And the Lord has for so many of them have been able to resettle places, start their lives over. If they can go back, that would be their first choice. But at this point, that Iraq has been tough for them to go back to.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, Nadine Maenza is with me. And after the break, I'm going to ask her, because she is on this commission. I mean, they observe, they learn, they find out the lay of the land, but we cannot save everybody from their terrible situation. But what can we do? That's what I'm going to ask her after the break.
Okay.
And then we're going to go and unpack what's going on in Syria. Nadine has a lot of news, I'm sure, and also thoughts, and we'll do that right after this.
There's an old saying that the first casualty in war is truth. Maybe that helps you understand what's happening in America right now. Thankfully, it's not a war with bullets, but there is a war for control. Control of the country and control of your pocketbook. Truth is under fire, but you can help turn the tide by supporting Truth. Join the Truth team at Point of View Radio. Learn how you can make a difference at pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Don't let truth become a casualty on your watch. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151.
So what would you do with an extra $500 a month in your budget? Pay off loans, save it, do something fun? Well, it's something you may need to think about if you become a member of MediShare. MediShare is a Christian healthcare sharing ministry, and it works. You can save big time on your healthcare costs, and you don't have to pay for things you don't believe in either. Find out more. Call 855-SHARE-40. That's 855-SHARE-40. 855-SHARE-40.
Point of View will continue after this.
You're listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Penna Dexter.
For those of you who are listening in the previous hour, I did mention that Tim Winter from Parents Television Council will be joining us, and he will be talking about not only the fall lineup of television, but also this Joker movie that's out. He recommends you not take your children. And so we'll do that in the next hour. Some of you will not get the next hour, but you can listen at pointofview.net. And I am speaking now with Nadine Maenza. She is President Trump's appointee to the Commission for International Religious Freedom. She serves there with also others that we know, which is Gary Bauer and Tony Perkins. And I was so glad to hear from Nadine. She gives such good explanations of these issues. And Nadine, I want you to talk, before we go on to Syria, which is really the news peg today, I want you to talk about we as believers here at home, what can we do? How do we pray? And also, what can our country do? Specifically for Iraq right now.
Sure. For Iraq, obviously pray. We only took 68, I think it was 68 refugees last year, the United States did. So it was just such a small amount for the crisis they have there. And unfortunately, when we cut our refugee numbers, we were told by the United Nations that other countries did the same. So in some respects, we think others will pick up the gap. But as the leader of a lot of these issues, it's the opposite. And when we pull back, so does everyone else. So right now, there's really few places for some of these people to go, to be honest. So just pray that the Lord opens doors for others. I know Canada and Australia has probably been the biggest welcomer to people from Iraq. And so we're thankful that they've been willing to take them and resettle them and help them to start their lives over. Germany is taking quite a few as well. So it's a tough, there is no perfect, obviously, for this, and no one's suggesting the United States open their borders to everyone who's fleeing from anything. But I do want to mention the difference with a refugee. I think sometimes there's so much going on at the border that we get confused with an immigrant, a migrant, an IDP, all those, internal displaced person, refugee. So refugee is somebody that the United Nations has specifically decided they can't go back. So like the family I mentioned is a perfect example of a refugee. They had to leave and they can't go back. It's not safe for them to go back. So where do they go? I was in a country where I was able to meet a young woman who had escaped from China, and her father was put in one of the internment camps there in Xinjiang, and she they keep coming back to her house looking for her to come back. If she comes back, she'll be taken and put in those camps as well. She can't go back. So she's waiting for refugee status from the United Nations, but a refugee is a little different. And normally they're vetted by 2 years before they even start the vetting process to the United Nations. And then when the United States decides to take someone, we do our own internal vetting. We interview them as well. So, we do, the commission, extreme vetting, we say, no one's suggesting, like I said, we saw in Europe, like just groups of people crossing borders, entering countries. No one's suggesting that, obviously, in the United States. But we are saying there's a safe way that we can take refugees, and that doesn't interfere with our other goals of safety and security for our country.
So that's what you exist for, in a sense, to make some of this calculation so that you can make recommendations to our government?
That's exactly what we do. So let me explain a little bit about the commission. It's so unique. So 20 years ago, Congressman Frank Wolf, a lot of you know, he helped lead this effort, but a lot of well-known people, like at the time, Senator Brownback, Senator Rick Santorum, others, really fought to set up, they passed in 1998 the International Religious Freedom Act. And what it did, it created in the State Department the Office of International Religious Freedom, which Ambassador Brownback is currently the head of. And then it also set up this independent agency called the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. And there are 9 of us commissioners. We're bipartisan. As Tony Perkins says, we are the best bipartisan group, the most bipartisan group in Washington. There is no daylight between the Democrats and the Republicans on our commission. When you're throwing people, when killing people for their faith, it doesn't matter if you're Democrat or Republican. We're really united, unusually so, on our mission, which has been just really wonderful to work so closely with Democrats that we would probably not work with on other things. That But these issues are very bipartisan. And Brownback is also an ex officio member of our commission as well. So he comes in and joins us from time to time.
Now
and
I get how it's set up.
We work closely together. So he definitely, and they've always been a part of the commission. And so our goal really is to make recommendations to our own government. So when we travel, we do so to inform ourselves, like with Iraq. And then we'll go and met with members of Congress. We're meeting with, different people in the administration and sharing what we heard. And then we do a report each year that makes recommendations. And we also adopt prisoners of conscience, which is a really fascinating way. If you want to pray for some people, you can go to usurf.gov. It's USCIRF. USURF for short is U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. And then we have some people that we've adopted. I've adopted two, Raif Badawi from Saudi Arabia and Pastor Youssef Nadakani from Iran. And they're people we advocate for. There's write-ups about them. They're people that are being unjustly held because of their faith or lack of faith. Raif Badawi questioned Islam, and that was enough for him to be put in prison in Saudi Arabia. So we also advocate for atheists, because this makes a lot of sense. If you're not allowed to be an atheist in the country, then you're probably not allowed to be a Christian. So the freedom of thought, the freedom of belief, the freedom of religion, they're all really closely tied together. And so, we really fight for that space. And really the one thing our government is doing well is raising the awareness of the importance of religious freedom. I think the Democrats on our commission would agree, and Democrats everywhere, frankly, that there's been no administration ever so strong on religious freedom or has done more on religious freedom. Ambassador Brownback and Secretary of State Pompeo held two different ministerials, one this summer and one this summer before, where over 100 minister-level, secretary-level leaders from different countries came to Washington to talk about religious freedom. And now they're setting them up all over the world. They're setting up different ones next time. So it's really an amazing time to see countries trying to teach best practices, teach them that, you'll have more security, you'll have the things that you want, more economic development, all those things with religious freedom. Because so much of this clampdown on religious freedom, they think they're controlling things, and what they're doing is actually doing the opposite.
They're pushing things out of control.
Yeah, they are. And even with extremists, a lot of them use this as an excuse, like we're afraid of radical Islam. Well, be honest, when you don't let people practice their faith and you clamp down on them, put them in jails, because, even Muslims, that doesn't create an environment that's going to fight radical Islam, right? If anything, it's the opposite. So really having, encouraging them like we have in different places, like Syria, for instance, where this Northeast region is a beautiful example of religious freedom. We have moderate Muslims practicing, allowing Christians to practice, allowing Yazidis to practice. And that's, of course, right now all questionable.
Under question, under advisement.
Exactly.
Let me just, before the break, Nadine, this is tiny, but just to give people a little bit of undergirding background of the situation, but because, it was all the big news that the president announced to the Turkish president that the U.S. will be pulling out people out of northern Syria on the border of Turkey. And this is an area where there are Kurds, and we've cooperated with those Kurds. We could be unleashing some chaos there, but the president is insisting this is the right thing. He wants to not be involved in, quote unquote, endless wars. But when I look at the numbers there, it's like 1,000 or less.
I know.
So, we need to know how to think about this. There's a lot of people who love to criticize the president, and sometimes the president doesn't give a lot of information because he's tweeting, so they don't know all the reasons behind a decision. So, there's just a lot to unpack here. And the news today is that the president of Turkey, Erdogan, announced that Turkey's military has launched a long-expected offensive into northeastern Syria, targeting U.S. allied Syrian Kurdish fighters who have played a central role in battling ISIS. So that's happened now. And they say they want to prevent the creation of a terror corridor across the southern border. They say that these Kurds there are terrorists. Are they?
No. So Turkey has had a long-standing negative relationship with the Kurdish nation. And of course, the Kurds are, as a people, the largest ethnic group without their own country. And they're scattered throughout Iraq, Iran, Turkey, Syria. And this region of Syria is actually an autonomous region that's being run right now by the Syrian Democratic Council, and there is freedom of religion in this. This is the one part of Syria that is actually peaceful right now, because it's not being run by Assad, and so it is the one place, like I said, that is peaceful. And so he's been negotiating with the United States for this corridor where they can move back some of their refugees, and to get what he says.
Okay, they want to put refugees back in there.
They do, and they want to push the Kurds away from the border and then create a place for the refugees. The problem is...
Let me jump in, Nadine, because we're just up on a break. We're going to continue describing the situation and sort of discussing, is President Trump wrong in doing this, or are there some nuances? And what is the situation with religious freedom in that area? Can it be protected? There's a lot to unpack. I'm glad Nadine's with me to do it. And stay tuned for more Point of View. And don't forget, folks, that in the next hour, we're going to talk about TV. You might not want to miss that, so stay tuned. We'll be back with more Point of View.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
I'm Penna Dexter. I'm talking with Nadine Maenza about Syria and the situation there. And I wanted to note a couple of things, Nadine, and have you react. First of all, the Kurds who are there in northeast Syria, they have some measure of self-determination there, and they want to hold that. They're holding about 12,000 Islamic State fighters there. And does that risk, if Turkey goes in, does that risk letting those people loose?
Absolutely. They've made it clear that, if they're fighting Turkey, it's going to be hard for them to also hold down a prison. So there is that 10, 12,000 ISIS fighters that could very well be freed during this assault, depending on how this works out.
So the Turkish president has wanted us to part ways with the Kurds, but they've been our allies. If we pull out who is in there when we don't really know how many are in there, do we leave them? We leave them in a bad situation.
We do, and even as we speak, Turkey has begun the offensive. I just had a video sent to me. Kormashio, a city on the border of Syria, Christian neighborhoods, that the houses are all on fire. So, it's begun. So they're on their way in. I have no idea at what point, what will happen at this point, if they'll continue, or at some point someone will talk them into stopping. I know that, the idea that they're coming in, that we're just leaving the Kurds to fend for themselves is, after all they've done for us and how many died fighting ISIS is really hard, I think, for so many. As you've seen, if you watch the news at all, it's very bipartisan. I mean, most people are not fans of this. We understand the endless wars. Mm-hmm. I mean, we're all tired. I mean, you go to Iraq and you're just like, can we just stop this? Like, can we make this better? But unfortunately, we had a lot to do with causing all of this unstable environment. Frankly, when we went in and we overthrew Saddam Hussein, and then we pulled out prematurely, and then we came back again. So we've just and then we, at one point when we were running Iraq, we fired the entire military without pay and let them leave with their weapons without pay.
But what about in Syria?
Yeah, so
it's not quite the same.
Not quite, but still, you've seen the fallout of that. The radical Islam that grew in Iraq also grew in Syria. And then you've had Assad, who's been a very difficult, difficult situation. There's been no good guys in that war. So part of the problem with the war in Syria is who do we, it really is a very difficult situation. But this particular northeast zone, unfortunately, was the one part of Syria that wasn't problematic. It's problematic to Turkey because they have had a long-standing fight against the Kurds, and there is a terrorist organization called the PKK, which is the Kurdistan Workers' Party, that is a terrorist organization that even the United States has called a terrorist organization, that's in Turkey. And even though there is a relationship between them and the Syrian Democratic Forces, that doesn't necessarily make the Syrian Democratic Forces also terrorists. We have not named them terrorists. But there is that long-standing fight with Erdogan, which is why it is so scary to see him come in, because and he even said that, he wants to get rid of them. I mean, so this isn't, he's coming in to take land because he wants it. He also hates the Kurds. And so we have not found him to be trustworthy with religious freedom. In the last few years, Turkey has been declining with religious freedom. We all remember Andrew Brunson being in prison there and how horrible he was treated. And so, it is a scary time to see what will happen in the near future.
Now, some of the reports, Nadine, that I've seen have said what the president's pullout is more to get people who are in an advisory capacity out of the way to safety. So is there some truth to that?
I think most people don't think Turkey would have come in without his permission because they're a NATO ally. It would have been difficult if we said, right now I know the White House has made a statement saying Turkey should not have come in. It's sending a lot of mixed messages. So, we like I said, the administration is fabulous on religious freedom. This particular situation, we're disappointed. I know that the commission that is a majority Republican, we did speak out yesterday with our fear about, or on Monday, our fear about this situation and allowing Turkey into Syria.
What's your biggest fear about it?
My biggest fear is the religious minorities. So what will happen when first of all, as we're seeing already neighborhoods on fire of religious minorities, but what will happen if they bring 1 million or 700,000 to 1 million Syrian refugees? These are not Syrian refugees from this region. They're from probably other parts of the country. So they're going to bring in non-Kurds that are basically going to take over Kurdish areas and Christian areas and Yazidi areas. So what we've seen before when Turkey did that before in Afrin, they moved in and pushed everyone out of Afrin. There was and most people considered it ethnic cleansing, how many people were killed. They took their houses. Now, if you go in Afrin, the women are all covered. It's a very strict Islamic area, and it used to be a free Kurdish area. So when you see Afrin, you see how that happened. To think that could be duplicated in other parts of this region is unsettling to us because we don't trust Turkey, basically.
Oh, man. So
yeah,
there could be a humanitarian disaster.
Right.
Is there a way that, so do you think the president, now that Turkey has actually gone in, is going to bring people back or bring military in there or just let it go?
I have absolutely no idea what he will do. I pray he will. I know a lot of people have advised him to do so. And now that Turkey's coming in and to see, what their immediate actions are, I'm just getting first reports, so I haven't been able to verify much of what I've heard. So we're still waiting to see, what really is happening. But we're afraid for the religious minorities. We're afraid for the Christians in particular because we know they're very vulnerable. The Yazidis are very vulnerable. So, yeah.
I guess the way I look at it is, it's a very, very difficult sort of call to make because there's one sense in which we have a president right now who wants to focus on our own country to, make things better here. He doesn't want us spread out all over the world, getting involved in all kinds of countries. But yet we have. That's been part of our history, and we're a benevolent power. And, for the most part, we cause damage with some of our decisions, but we are there. And so, we've kept troops in a lot of places where there have been wars. We've kept some presence there. And, I think that that's necessary to leave somewhat of a presence in certain parts of the Middle East where we've already been. But this president, sometimes he talks purist and then he ends up backing off and not acting quite so pure on the international front. That may be where it goes. But it's just a hard call sometimes. And for those of us looking on the outside who are believers and our compassionate hearts are there, not wanting these people to suffer.
It's definitely, the president made a promise that he was going to pull people out. And as Obama had before, frankly, we don't want endless wars. I would rather us be out of Iraq, I'd rather us be out of Syria. But actually it may cause more wars to be out because our forces are stabilizing force at this point in time. And so by staying there, we're actually keeping the wars from happening versus causing them. So, but it is a hard decision. I pray for the president. We all, as you've seen, a lot of very supportive people of the president are very disappointed in this particular decision. It's very hard. I can only imagine what it must be like to make the decisions he has to make. So I will continue to pray for him and pray for the people here that are in harm's way, and that things, if they're continuing in a bad way, that decisions will be changed and safety will come back to this region.
Well, Nadine, thank you. So as we predicted, this wasn't enough time. We did our hour, but thank you so much for giving me an hour. And thank you for just weighing in on all these things and for your work. We need to be praying for you. And now that I've spoken with you about these issues, I certainly will be. So God bless you and thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
That's Nadine Maenza. Next up, we will speak with Tim Winter about all things television. We'll have a little report before that, but you won't want to miss it.
Point of view. Does it make a difference? Jeremy Dies would tell you that it does. He grew up listening to Point of View in the back seat of his mom's car, and it helped to shape his thinking.
I had parents that were able to sit across from me at the dinner table after we listened to Marlon Maddox and Kirby Anderson years ago and think through what the scriptures say about these issues of current significance in our lives. That's only possible because Point of View has come along and ministered into my life and made me who I am today. And here I am today defending religious liberty, partly because Marlon Maddox and Penna Dexter and Kirby Anderson were the ones that were pushing me towards all that. They taught me how to think through these issues. They didn't tell me what to think. They taught me how to think.
Each gift you give will change lives. Not every Point of View listener will become a Jeremy, but if they listen for very long, they will be changed. And that will change how they impact and affect the lives of the people around them. So make that decision to change a life today. Join the Truth Team and boldly stand for truth in a world of lies, distortion, and information manipulation. Go to pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151.
Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Penna Dexter.
So glad you're sticking with us here at Point of View. I am Penna Dexter, and I'm excited about our next guest. Lately, we've been bringing Tim Winter to the microphones here at Point of View because we really need to talk about what's happening in television. And also in the movies at times, and we're going to start with that story. My guest is Tim Winter. He heads up the Parents Television Council, and that is a nonpartisan education organization advocating responsible entertainment. Tim Winter has gotten his experience with NBC for 15 years. He knows what he's talking about. And Tim, thank you so much for being with me today.
Penna, good day to you and to your listeners. It's always a pleasure to be on the horn with you.
Well, it's good to have you, and really, we've got a lot of things to talk about, but I want to start with The Joker, which is the origin story of Batman that opened in theaters over the weekend. I wanted to have you last week, but I wasn't hosting, because I wanted to warn people. But we still need to issue these warnings. It'll be around a while. Tell us, the violence there is just reason enough, isn't it, not to take your kids?
Yeah, it really is. Parents need to understand that this is not Cesar Romero on the Batman that most of us grew up with in the 60s. This is a very violent, ultra-violent, dark-themed Joker character that is rated R, and certainly for a reason. But, most parents don't immediately distinguish when they see the Joker, the Batman. They think, okay, yeah, this is the comic book. It's probably okay for my kids.
It may be R, but it's probably okay. That's what they're thinking.
Yeah, they're thinking, well, maybe it's just something. This is really horrific. And it's funny. I think I've in prior conversations have talked about how every once in a while, even the folks here in Hollywood will give us a tip saying, hey, there's something really concerning about a show here, and we know you're going to be upset about it. This is one of those instances where the Hollywood media actually came to us and said, this is really violent. This is even more violent than we're comfortable with. And so we got into it right away, and it was interesting. Whenever Hollywood wants to push a theme on our society, on our culture, they talk about how the great positive impact they can have by pushing something that they like. And when it's something that they choose not to be responsible for, they just simply get up and walk out of the room when somebody challenges them. That's what the director and the star of this movie did in a public setting where somebody pushed back and said, don't you think this is too violent? Isn't this, especially now in our culture with so much gun slaughter going on, isn't this the wrong thing at the wrong time? And the actor literally got up and walked out in disgust.
Really?
It's such hypocrisy. And I know that your listeners across the country would be not surprised one bit to know that there's hypocrisy in Hollywood. But this is just one of those demonstrations where they take absolutely no responsibility whatsoever when they're contributing to a culture of violence and slaughter of innocent human life across the nation. They say they have nothing to do with it, even though they know they have something to do with it.
Let's open up the phones for Tim Winter. I know folks are going to have questions or comments, so it's 800-351-1212. We can take some calls here in this half hour. It's 45 minutes. I'm going to have Tim with me, so I'm glad I have you for that long, Tim. And, this one movie, The Joker, do they not remember that there was an actual theater shooting in the showing of one of the Batman series? I mean, do they not connect those two at all?
Actually, the families of people who lost their lives in Colorado at that theater shooting with the Joker situation wrote to the theater and concerning about the amount of violence in the movie. And the studios were quick to dodge it and to deflect, and that's what they do. They are quick to put their publicists in motion to delay, deflect, deny whenever there's any sort of criticism. It's funny here. One thing I've noticed in Hollywood over my decades here, the folks who produce and star in some of these movies are incredibly thin-skinned. They can't take it. They can't take it. They get so upset at any critical mention, and yet they are the harshest at criticizing those with whom they disagree. So it's just not an equal equation. And as we were saying, the societal violence, the fact that at another, I guess it's been 8 years ago or 9 years ago, whenever that shooting was in Colorado at the theater. You had families who actually lost loved ones in that situation, wrote to the theater, concerned about the violence and the gun violence. And it was just summarily dismissed by the studio.
800-351-1212 if you'd like to call in on this. Folks, we've posted a piece out of Reuters on the Joker, just talking about the violence there. And, some adults might want to go see this. I've seen the term, and I don't know if this is your term, Tim, at Parents Television Council, but violence porn. Is that what this is?
Yeah, that's the way we're describing it, and that's the way others have described it as well. It's when violence is used as a disgustingly twisted way of exciting someone emotionally. That's, I think, violent. I think the porn moniker is appropriate when it's used to titillate. The porn moniker, I think, is the right one to use, and this is been described as violence porn.
So, what do you think about? The movie exists, and if it were promoted as it is R-rated, but if more were made of the fact that it's very violent. And then, there's certain people that just like that. And I think in a free country, I suppose that's okay. But if you're just more open about it, or if Hollywood was just a little bit more forward thinking about children, would that be, would you at PTC be happy with that? Would that be fine with you?
Well, we
or would you rather just see them not make movies like that or television?
I would rather that folks have their better sensibilities about themselves and decide that maybe that what they're doing is harmful, and then consider different ways of entertaining people. But in our in our cherished nation, in our First Amendment right to free speech, we understand that people have the ability to produce this type of thing. But when you look at the right of free speech, at some point a writer has to get greenlit by a studio. There's a corporation that's a publicly traded corporation. This corporation, Warner Brothers, owned by AT&T. So when you look at a corporate structure, somewhere along the line, a corporation, a publicly traded corporation, is putting its reputation on the line, its resources, and saying to its shareholders that this is what we stand for as an organization, that this type of content is okay. They can try to hide behind, the flag and say, well, we have every right to do this. Okay, you do. But just because you have the right to do it doesn't mean you should. Right. Yeah,
okay. We're coming up on a break, Tim, and I think that's something for people to kind of mull over a little bit as we take a quick break from this. And we'll continue talking about what's out there on television and a few more comments on the Joker from Tim Winter from Parents Television Council.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Planned Parenthood has been facing some political setbacks in Congress and some state legislatures, but Planned Parenthood seems to be making some advances in the culture arena. One example of that is the impact the organization is having in Hollywood. The director of arts and entertainment engagement at Planned Parenthood was bragging the other day about her growing influence in Hollywood. She confirmed that the organization advised on more than 150 productions since 2014. This has been a concerted effort to influence the abortion dialogue and thus shape people's perspectives. The director explained that originally she would be watching TV and going to movies in order to figure out who might be open to including storylines. Now she has repeat clients and even has people calling her. One article asked whether culture can change politics. That is hardly a difficult question. I've often said that politics is downstream from culture. Change culture and cultural perceptions, and you will eventually change political perspectives. I was completely unaware of the pervasive influence of Planned Parenthood in Hollywood. I was aware of the pro-abortion message in the film Cider House Rules that was based on the novel by John Irwin. The coming-of-age story challenges the moral perspective of the character played by Tobey Maguire because of the doctor played by Michael Caine. The rules in the Cider House are posted in the dorm of the workers, but they eventually decide to write their own rules, thus reinforcing the theme of moral relativism. Although that was a blatant abortion message, apparently Planned Parenthood has been working behind the scenes to make sure a latent pro-abortion message appears in films rather than a pro-life message. That is why we always need discernment whenever we watch a film. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back. I'm Penna Dexter. Tim Winter is with me from the Parents Television Council. We're talking about the latest in the Batman franchise, The Joker, starring Joaquin Phoenix. And there's just one more question I wanted to ask you about it, Tim, and that is, there have been warnings. I mean, it's warnings certainly about children, but also warnings that this movie could incite real-life violence. And I saw that Warner Brothers actually issued a statement, and they're saying, well, we're not holding this character that Joaquin Phoenix plays up as an example. That's how they get out of it?
Yeah, of course they're not. I chuckle, and it's not a chuckle of joy. It's a chuckle of irony, and we just heard a moment ago on the break, Kirby Anderson was talking about the impact of our culture on our nation's values, and I think this is one of those blatant examples where Hollywood just can't have it both ways. We've heard news stories about increased police presence at the movie theaters around the country for this film. And, we're grateful for that. We hope, we pray there's no real-life violence that stems from this. But this is what we see as yet another contributing factor to a desensitization of violence and the impact on human life in our nation, around the world, that the media really can have an impact, a harmful impact. It can use its power for good. It can use its power for negative impact. And sadly, we see this as one of the most negative demonstrations. And that's why we've issued one of our strongest calls ever to warning parents not to bring their children to see The Joker.
Tim, television used to be a little tamer than the movies. You could at least not depend on television to be, pure or anything, but it was better. Is that changing?
As you know, the whole industry of television is in this massive change right now. When I was with NBC back in the 80s and 90s, when I started with NBC, there were 3 television networks, and then came along the fourth, Fox, and then a couple of others. You had fewer choices, and that required programming to be more suitable for broad audiences. You had fewer choices that you reached the masses of America, so you had to appeal to the broadest possible reach. And that no longer is the case. You had now, a couple hundred channels in the cable universe. Now you have Netflix and Amazon Prime and Hulu and the different streaming platforms. The whole industry of television is in a massive upheaval. Even my friends at the broadcast networks aren't sure really where to go next with their business. A lot of questions, very few answers. But what we do know is it's becoming a very custom-tailored world, and along with that comes a lot of programs that in the past weren't good enough to make it to market because there were fewer outlets. So you had to be really good to make it to the market, to make it to get greenlit by a network. Now there's so many outlets, you can have stuff that wasn't good enough. Now it can find a way to be distributed, and increasingly more sexually explicit, more profane, more violent. Sadly, there are only a handful of people really doing it well in terms of pro-family entertainment, and it's becoming more explicit. And you'd think that there'd be more options for parents and families as we have this new shift into digital media, but sadly, that's not been the case.
Well,
at least not as much as it should be.
Let's switch to maybe turn ourselves around to the positive side of things, because you just mentioned there are a few networks that you can depend on to be pro-family and be suitable for children. Can you give us a few examples?
Yeah, on the cable side, we have, as my wife loves this time of the year, the Hallmark Channel movies are coming on, and Hallmark has for years been proudly pro-family, proudly embrace messages of positive faith, depictions of positive, of faith in a positive light, and they have been, I think, the most successful commercially right now. But you have others as well. Up Television, which used to be called the GMC Gospel Music Channel. Up TV has good stuff. INSP, Inspiration, has good stuff. There are other small networks, niche networks, that are trying to program to family audiences, to pro-family audiences, faith and family audiences. Streaming companies like PureFlix is leading the way in terms of trying to provide digital streaming media platforms for pro-faith and pro-family audiences. So there are some good people out there that are doing good work, and every once in a while we do see a positive show, even on the broadcast networks, that we want to make sure that we're supporting. If they're going to take a bold step for them and do something that is pro-family, then let's try to support their efforts.
Folks, if you want to ask Tim Winter a question, it's 800-351-1212. I also saw one thing I like to do with the emails that I get from you, Tim, is that it just helps me understand some of the things, the good, positive things that are happening. And one of them that you mentioned, it's mixed, but Sesame Street, who, my kids grew up with, and it's got its whole library is moving to HBO. It'll be available there. That's going to be confusing to try to find what you want, but Sesame Street will be there, and that's a good thing. But it's going to be somewhat expensive, which seems, and you pointed out, seems a little difficult for maybe perhaps the kids, since this is so educational. The communities that are lacking in education that could benefit the most are actually may be locked out. So that's a problem, right?
It is a concern. We understand that Sesame Workshop, the company behind Sesame Street, is like any other nonprofit looking for new ways of supporting its production through revenue, enhanced revenue, and HBO is willing to pay for it. So we understand that helps Sesame Workshop. The problem is, just as you said, Penna, this is a show that I think perhaps the most profound and impactful educational television franchise in history for children. And you said your kids grew up with it. Kids around the world have learned to count, learned to spell, learned to be more civil and decent human beings, children with one another. And the first-run episodes are now all exclusively on HBO, now going to HBO Max, a streaming service. So, number one, it disadvantages parents and families who don't have the money to spend on that type of a product. But also, if you are going to pay for Sesame Street on HBO, you are now also paying for Euphoria, which is a teen-targeted, drug-infused, graphically sexually abusive, violent, really disturbing, twisted show that is marketed to children, to teenagers. So you, as a parent, are now are basically underwriting the production of Euphoria because you want to get Sesame Street for your children. That seems really upside down to us, where we think it's a tragedy that it's no longer going to be housed exclusively on PBS.
So the kids who, I don't think it's ideal to park your kids in front of any television show and expect them to, be entertained for hours and hours at a time and all of that. But the kids who are parked in front of televisions more because their parents are so occupied elsewhere, just making ends meet, won't be able to be in front of this particular show that actually could do them some good. So that's too bad. And I didn't even think about the other part of this. Supporting one supports the other. Now, HBO, who's the parent company?
HBO is owned by Warner Brothers, which is owned by AT&T. AT&T recently purchased Warner Brothers and HBO. We've been talking, trying to get the attention of the CEO of AT&T, Randall Stevenson. He proclaims himself to be a family man, a man of faith.
Yeah.
He was National Boy Scouts leader, and yet his DirecTV platform has hardcore pornography, and his HBO platform has what we see is graphic sex and violence, drug abuse, where children are trading drugs with adults in exchange for sex. It's every parent's worst nightmare, and it's something that is increasingly being held out there for impressionable teens and preteens to watch, to see, well, how are these cool kids doing? And by the way, it's starring a former Disney Channel star, Zendaya. And so young girls who grew up watching Zendaya on Disney Channel now see her in a role that is very, very troubling, very toxic for children's health.
Parents Television Council has also chosen their recommendations, the best and the worst new fall TV shows for families. We're going to ask Tim Winter about that after the break, because actually parents and grandparents need some guidance here. The world of television is much more complex than it used to be. So we're going to ask Tim about that. And if you want to ask him about a particular program, or are you excited about this whole new library of Sesame Street being available on HBO? Are you happy about that? Give us a call, 800-351-1212, and we'll be right back.
So when people first hear about MediShare, they have questions. Some good ones, like, what is it? Well, MediShare is a Christian healthcare sharing ministry. It's not health insurance. It's a different way of doing things, which leads us to this question. Why do so many become MediShare members? Two big reasons. They save a lot. The typical family saves $500 a month, and they feel great about it. With MediShare, you aren't forced to pay for things you don't believe in. Find out more. 855-SHARE-40. That's 855-SHARE-40.
It seems we can't get through a day without hearing how science has been corrupted to support political goals. Media entities have sold out truth for the sake of favored narratives. Even some religious groups have abandoned the Bible to support things based on feelings. So who can you trust? Kirby Anderson and the Point of View Truth Team are your source for real news. Learn how you can make a difference by joining the team at pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. In a world of unending fog, Point of View is a shining light. Do your part at pointofview.net/team or 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Penna Dexter.
And Tim Winter from Parents Television Council, also with me by phone. And we are talking, next up, we're going to discuss Hollywood's best and worst TV shows, according to Parents Television Council. But first, let's take some calls, Tim. Let's go to Michigan and speak with Gerson. Hi, Gerson. Thanks for calling in.
Oh, hi there. How are you?
Great.
Well, I guess it's a little bit of a question, more like a statement with a little bit of anger. But what do we do? I mean, I got grandkids at an age that they've been watching shows that I don't believe they're appropriate, and that they're everywhere on TV. The cartoons that have very dirty messages built in, and getting into the gender stuff and homosexuality in the middle of the cartoons, and it's just getting to a point that we can't even let them watch cartoons anymore. It's becoming ridiculous. I was very upset about the whole thing with Sesame Street that they moved over to HBO. I didn't know that was kind of getting mixed up with I don't know if it's the same a similar time or what, but this teen show that has some bad stuff in
Euphoria.
it. I'm not familiar. Yeah, I'm not familiar with it, but I was just tuning in after leaving work, and this is just very upsetting.
So your question is, how do we handle it when things are popping up and when we start the show, a cartoon or whatever, we don't even know, and something pops up? I mean, that's hard, Tim.
Yeah. I got, like I said, it's my grandkids. My oldest grandchild is 7 years old now, and he's been watching some stuff that it's got violence and it's got stuff that I don't really agree with. And you want to be nice and let him watch it, but at the same time, I mean, how do you separate being nice and then?
Let's let Tim respond. Tim?
Yeah, Gerson, thank you for the question, and I hear similar sentiments from every corner of the nation, is what I just heard from Michigan. It is parents, grandparents concerned about the seemingly nowhere to turn for entertainment that reflects their values and that steers clear of the things that are concerning. It's never been more difficult to be a parent monitoring your child's media consumption than right now, because you have phones and computers and iPads, you have televisions and smart TVs, you have so many different ways of accessing video games, you name it, the plethora of media outlets that are reaching children today. It requires a redoubling of our efforts as parents, as families, as grandparents, and it requires us to speak up and speak out when we see things that really violates our sensibilities. When you think about the entertainment industry, there's, like any other industry, if you want to push back, you follow the money. And the way you follow the money, especially with television, is, well, who are the advertisers? The Parents Television Council tries to keep track and monitor what corporations are sponsoring which programs on television, so that we can say to those corporations, you're the ones actually writing the bills to the networks. You're the ones paying the bills of the TV networks by advertising on their shows. You're the ones who are ultimately accountable and responsible for underwriting the things that we find harmful to children. And so I would say that, number one, you have to make the best decisions you possibly can for what's out there for your kids and grandkids. Number two, do not be silent. Talk to the network, but especially talk to the advertisers. It's pretty simple to do so. We can help you. All you have to do is reach out to the Parents Television Council. We can steer you to how to reach the sponsors of these shows.
I do want to recommend Parents Television Council website. You can go there today by just going through pointofview.net. You can see Tim's picture and go to the website that's posted right there. But it's what is it, PT? Tim, tell us the website.
ParentsTV.org. Yep, ParentsTV.org. ParentsTV.org. It's a treasure trove of information. You can learn how to be an activist and speak up, speak out. Just be a more informed adult, be a more informed parent, but more importantly, don't stand for the status quo.
I highly recommend the website. Just keep it in your brain. It's really actually pretty easy to remember, even though I didn't remember it, but it's because I'm spoiled because we are linking to it. So, I mean, I recommend this as a tool for parents. It's just really a good tool. Let's go to Shelby in the state of Georgia now. Shelby, you're on with Tim Winter.
Yeah, I mostly have comments. And what we've been doing is when I homeschool my daughter, and what I did was limit what she watched. And if there's something that came on, I talked to her about it, saying that's not appropriate and we're going to shut this off and we can go do something else, or we can put a video and it's more appropriate, stuff like that. Another thing is we got to look at the libraries. And can you hear me?
Yes.
The libraries are doing the same thing. They're carrying a lot of not good materials, especially for the teenagers. I went in there to look for materials for myself, because sometimes there's good positive stories, at least there used to be, for teenage girls and boys, and now there's not. We got to start going to the libraries and trying to encourage these librarians to order better materials for our teenagers. Another thing is we need to start doing interlibrary through our homes, through Christian facilities, through churches, and having materials that parents and kids and children can utilize.
Yeah, good idea. You know, it's the libraries, it's Hollywood. And I mean, you'd think you'd be safe going to a library, but we're not. But neither are we safe in our own homes, in front of our own televisions. And so I do think that Shelby is an example of an involved parent, and there's just part of that we all need to take to heart, don't we?
Absolutely. And Shelby, I applaud you for the care that you are taking with your family, with your children, in terms of being aware of what they're consuming, and to explain. You know, it helps to put some context for a child to understand why you are asking them to turn the channel away from something that you find inappropriate. And when you talk about libraries, actually, it's a wonderful little segue, quite by accident, but I want to thank you for it. You know, we were just prepared to talk about what's on TV this coming fall, and most women, every woman in my life, I will put it that way, grew up reading Nancy Drew, Nancy Drew Mysteries, and now there's a television show called Nancy Drew that is the exact opposite of everything positive about the book series Nancy Drew. It's a show that is chock full of graphic sex.
Really?
The Nancy Drew character is just infatuated with all she wants. She's just fixated on having sex. The sex is very graphic. There's profanity. And this is now a show named after Nancy Drew, which when you think about what is the most child-friendly franchise for young girls in print media, Nancy Drew has to be near the top of that list. But right now it's a new show. It's airing on Wednesday nights on the CW network at 8 Central, so you know a lot of kids are watching. And any young girl who has ever been a fan of the Nancy Drew books is going to think it's okay. Parents especially are going to think it's okay for their daughters. This is not okay. This is a show that has very graphic sex, graphic dialogue. It's very, very, occult, seances, ghosts. This is not the type of Nancy Drew that.
It's not your mother and your grandmother's Nancy Drew.
Not at all.
Okay, Tim, we only have like a minute left in the show, so can you tell us, kind of summarize quickly, the other worst shows?
Yeah, there's a show on Fox broadcast network that airs at 8 Central called Prodigal Son. And Prodigal Son is basically, it's the son of a mass murderer, and it's very dark, very twisted. It's extremely gory, very violent, includes sadomasochistic content, really bloody graphic violence. So we are urging parents and families to steer clear of Prodigal Son. But there are a couple of good shows. All Rise on CBS is a legal drama which actually has very positive content, very uplifting storytelling. It might not be for kids, but it is still, at least it's something that is free of graphic sex violence or profanity while having some really good storytelling along the way.
Okay, I also see on the best ABC's Mixed-ish and CBS's, I can't even.
Abishola.
Abishola.
Abishola, and it's a cute story about a man in his 50s who has a near fatal heart attack, and when he wakes, he falls for his Nigerian immigrant nurse.
Oh,
and it's a love story but it's very cute and something that we think that the families can get behind.
Well, Tim, thank you so much for joining me today. We covered the map, and thanks so much.
It's a pleasure, Penna. Make sure that folks are watching out for your kids on these.
See you tomorrow.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Well, I said goodbye, but my timing's off. I'm so glad I have another segment with you. I'm Penna Dexter, and it's Point of View. And we were just talking with Tim Winter about television and the movies, and it just kind of feels like there's a war on children, at least for their hearts and minds. And it's something that we have to be vigilant about and be aware of, I think. And it's interesting because as we speak about television, tomorrow night, starting at 7:30 and going till 12 midnight, there is a town hall on CNN. It's a town hall on LGBT issues with the Democratic candidates. It was going to be 10 of them until Bernie Sanders had his heart attack and he's had to drop out. But it's they're going to be asked one by one on LBGT issues, where they stand. And it's being put on by the Human Rights Campaign in connection with CNN. It's a pride event. They're calling it a pride event, an equality event. So you can look that up and watch. I'm going to watch a few of them. I want to hear what Joe Biden has to say about some of these issues. I'm just going to pick the ones I watch. I can't watch TV from 7:30 till midnight. It's just too much. I don't think I'd handle that much of it. But I wanted to mention that. It's there for you to take advantage of if you would like. And maybe I will be able to unpack a little bit of it on Friday here on Point of View on our weekend edition. Buddy Matthews will be joining me on Friday, and I love working with him, so that will be a fun day. It's the first time in history that a major cable news network will air a presidential event devoted to these issues. It's on the eve of National Coming Out Day. So it's going to be a promotion of these issues. And the candidates will appear back-to-back taking these questions. So just wanted to mention that. Also, if you listen online, you hear our commentaries, our viewpoints. And Kirby today has been talking about an issue that also concerns what we've been talking about with Tim Winter, and that is Planned Parenthood's influence over Hollywood. Who knew? Planned Parenthood has advised Hollywood over 150 movies and shows since 2014, and it's an effort to. This is reported in the Daily Caller at the Daily Signal by Mary Margaret Olahan, who writes a lot about these issues. And since 2014, there's been an effort to influence the abortion dialogue in Hollywood. A director at Planned Parenthood basically told reporters about this. So Planned Parenthood is the nation's largest abortion provider. They are losing the abortion battle in D.C. They're losing funding and they're losing support, but they're upping their game through Hollywood. And that's at least the opinion of freelance journalist Nora Kaplan-Bricker. She wrote this today in the Washington Post. And I did find this article in the Washington Post, and it looks like it's sort of a profile of Karen Spruck. I think that's how you say the name, Spruch. Karen Spruck is she's loved by the left. She's loved by Planned Parenthood, and now Hollywood is embracing her. She says that she has advised Hollywood on more than 150 movies, and she assisted with the 2014 romantic comedy, Obvious Child. And they're saying she's a rare person in the abortion rights movement for whom the past few years represent a breakthrough. Things are positive. She's Planned Parenthood's woman in Hollywood. And, the question that we could ask is, can culture change politics? Planned Parenthood is trying to do that. They're trying to encourage more progressive storytelling about abortion, and they're actually succeeding, even though our politics are moving against abortion. Karen Spruck. Okay. She works as what they call a script doctor. So she looks at scripts, and she helps the screenwriters interested in incorporating storylines about abortion to get them in there in the right way that presents Planned Parenthood and abortion in a positive light. We could see hints of her in all the TV shows coming out, from Shrill to Jane the Virgin to Obvious Child. It's really wonderful, said the writer-director of Obvious Child. She's like Planned Parenthood's secret weapon. Yes, she is. We need to be aware of her, don't we? A lot of people, and this is too bad, but it's true, learn about sexual and reproductive health care. Reproductive health care is a euphemism for abortion. They learn about it through pop culture and through entertainment programs. And pop culture has been very helpful to the LGBTQ movement in changing ideas, and they present it in a positive light over the last couple of decades. So Planned Parenthood is working to change hearts and minds. Now, our friends at the Susan B. Anthony's List organization, one of their spokespeople, Mallory Quigley, pointed out that the film Unplanned, which I know many of you saw and I saw, surpassed expectations by taking in $19 million at the box office. So, you know, that's on our side, the pro-life side, showing how hearts and minds can actually be affected through Hollywood on the abortion issue. Susan B. Anthony List is a nonprofit anti-abortion organization, and they're saying the abortion industry's grip on Hollywood is well known, but what might be surprising is how soundly their propaganda has failed to move American minds and hearts. So Susan B. Anthony List doesn't think they're all that effective. You know, I mean, how many people, even on the left, really want to watch a story about abortion? Everybody loves babies, so you don't really want to watch too many shows about murdering them. Susan B. Anthony's List says Americans are tired of pro-abortion elites telling them what to think and what to value. And so, you know, they're a little bit skeptical of this Karen Spruck and her efforts. And yet the left thinks she's great. They think that that she should be touted. So Planned Parenthood is actually having its effect in Hollywood. And if you want to find out more about it, I did post this article from the Daily Caller. And there's another one in the Washington Post that's very long and very, very, very positive about her. She has, as I said, affected an estimated 150 movies. And, you know, it's true, as the Washington Post mentions, that it's been legal to have an abortion in America for like 50 years. But it's been taboo to show one on television or film. She'd like to change that and write it into all the storylines and plots in Hollywood. Well, just what we need. It's too bad I didn't get to ask. I know Tim Winter mentioned this, but we could have gone into depth about that. That might be the subject for another interview with him. But, you know, it really is hard, and I think in a sense, to present abortion in a good light, no matter how you slice it. Lila Rose commented on it. She said it's like the tobacco industry getting to fact check how smoking is treated in films. And that's kind of what's happening with Planned Parenthood right now. So that is there. And if you want to hear Kirby's comments on it, you can go to pointofview.net. His viewpoint commentary is there, and he has a great commentary every single day. And they put mine up on Fridays. Well, speaking of Fridays, I'll see you Friday for our Friday weekend edition. And tomorrow, I think you'll hear Kirby. So you'll want to do that since I've been here all week. Thank you so much, Andrew, for your work. Also, Steve, for your hard work. And Karen, have a great night.
There's an old saying that the first casualty in war is truth. Maybe that helps you understand what's happening in America right now. Thankfully, it's not a war with bullets, but there is a war for control. Control of the country and control of your pocketbook. Truth is under fire, but you can help turn the tide by supporting truth. Join the Truth Team at Point of View Radio. Learn how you can make a difference at pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Don't let truth become a casualty on your watch. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151.
So what would you do with an extra $500 a month in your budget? Pay off loans, save it, do something fun? Well, it's something you may need to think about if you become a member of MediShare. MediShare is a Christian healthcare sharing ministry, and it works. You can save big time on your healthcare costs, and you don't have to pay for things you don't believe in either. Find out more. Call 855-SHARE-40. That's 855-SHARE-40. 855-SHARE-40.
Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.